novices at running our recording system. So for those just tuning in, you've been listening to probably nothing. And we're 10 minutes into the evening here. It's Tuesday, March 19th, 7:10. And this is the 2019 Street Improvement Project. We are here to discuss plans and specs for the 5 road improvement projects that we had discussed in previous months. And we're just getting started. We're going to ask our engineer, Shane Nelson, to give us some background information. We have our attorney, Bob Rupi, here, myself, the Mayor, Jeff Pilon, Councilmember Ray Rainville, Councilmember Linda Blake, Dan Bryan, and Joel Greenberg. And now, Shane, if you would give us the background, I'd appreciate it.
So, Mr. Mayor, the first item, I passed out some discussion points that I wanted to be sure to go over tonight. The first item of note was that this is one contractor, one project. So although these are separate projects for assessment purposes, as far as our contract with the contractor is concerned, it would be bid out as one large contract. The second item that I wanted to briefly discuss was we did
Just to make it really clear, because a lot of people that are affected by this obviously aren't here, so they'll be likely watching online. What we'll be bidding out is one project, and potentially if we drop a portion of the project, it would kill everything, or if it wasn't substantial, we could potentially negotiate with the winning contractor.
You would have to look at this as the attorney, you'd have to look at this as all or nothing. If the bids come back, and this is not something that you feel is appropriate for the city, then your option at that point in time would be to reject all bids.
Okay.
You may have heard the term bidding as an alternate. It's not, the way the engineering firm, the town engineer, city engineer is looking to bid these in order to get the best possible response from potential contractors and to get us the best possible price, is to do this as one project. You know, some communities will bid things out as an alternate. You can do an A or B, and we choose the right which one of these projects is going to go forward. That is not being offered here, because in that situation, we would not get the best possible contractors or the price potentially, because every contractor would wonder whether we were going to go through with the project or not, and whether he was going to get that work. This way, we've put the projects together as one large project. We're doing economies of scale. In this way, historically, from the communities that I've seen, and I know the same with engineer, we see the best possible number of contractors competing for the work and the best possible prices.
Right. And to clarify for those residents in the neighborhoods, it doesn't substantially change. I mean, the numbers we have will affect the final assessment, but the neighborhoods will be approximate to what we had expressed before. So we're not combining the 5 projects into one and giving everybody the same amount. Those neighborhoods will still be close to or approximate or proportionately dispersed like we had described before.
That is correct.
All right, so we're not pooling the whole project except on the overall cost.
That is correct.
Mr. Mayor, what you were referring to was the discussion at what we called the first public hearing, the improvement hearing, which was the engineer's construction estimate that was discussed.
Correct.
All right, sorry for the interruption, go ahead.
So, Mr. Mayor, we did do a limited soil investigation on Old Viking Boulevard. We obtained 11 pavement cores and 6 soil borings. I just want to call your attention to one soil boring number 5, which was near the Ford Brook, and that did encounter some organic soils. They're buried organic soils that have probably been there for quite some time, and most likely they're consolidated. If under an ideal situation, we excavate any organic soils out, but that would likely add a couple $100,000 to the construction cost. And we discussed early on in this process that we were trying to get the most bang for our buck with this project and really focus on surface improvements and acknowledge that there might be some areas where we have a little bit extra maintenance expenses. So in this area, we might expect, to do a little bit more crack filling than necessary. Maybe we have to go back, and do some patching, or there's a possibility that it's consolidated enough, that, it's really not that much of a headache, but I just wanna, again, call the attention to that, because we haven't done a road project for quite some time. And again, as we discussed early on, our intent is not to fix every, little thing, and certainly not to go after soil problems that are this deep, so.
So Shane, how close is this to the culvert, the bridge we put in? It appears like, obviously a little hard to tell from here, but we're on quite a distance either side of that culvert.
Right, it's just on the east side of the new pavement.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with the soil work that we did to put in that new culvert?
That's correct. When we put in the new culvert, we encountered the poor soils there also.
Why we dug out so much material for
Right.
the culvert?
We dug out the material, we imported structural fill, placed the box culvert on the structural fill, and then we tapered out of that, in order to provide, so we won't have an abrupt change in elevation. The soil boring information that you see is beyond or outside the limits of that original project. So there's still some peat soils or some organic soils in that low area by the brook. And again, that's something that we've, took a direction on early on in this project, that we're not gonna fix everything. And I just wanted to point that out to the council that, if there is some minor cracking or some problems there, it will be a city maintenance expense. It's not gonna be a contractor's warranty item.
Do we have any idea how far that peat extends? I mean, you took one soil boring there? From the one soil boring, you really can't tell if
No,
it
you
goes
can't.
significantly east of there, or,
Right.
we know it doesn't go west up into the new work that was done. We don't know beyond that if there's any to the west of there either near the brook.
There's likely some to the west also. I mean, again, when we put in the culvert, we corrected directly under the culvert, and then we tapered out of that. By providing a taper, you usually have some differential settlement, with different moisture contents in the soil. It absorbs the moisture differently, and it also, therefore, when it freezes, it reacts differently. And so by doing a taper out of that, it helps us make that change in elevation more gradual, so we don't feel a big bump or have maybe a 6-inch or 8-inch drop off in one location, kind of a shear point. So there likely would be some on both sides of the culvert, and if we were to correct it, it would be a significant expense. $200,000 is a ballpark number. I haven't actually estimated it because it was, again, beyond the scope of this project. But it would definitely be a couple $100,000.
So since we put in the culvert there, have you noticed any significant deterioration of the road or cracking in the road?
No, the pavement in the area of the culvert still appears pretty good.
So in the area where you took the soil boring, the road surface isn't unusually cracked compared to
In the area where we took the soil boring, it is
there?
cracked. It's heavily alligatored. There's a lot of other segments of the road that are heavily alligatored too and showing pattern cracking. But it definitely is, there's a bad piece of pavement in this area.
Okay.
And we could do things in the field, thicken up the bituminous a little bit, do a few things that are low-cost solutions to maybe help mitigate it, but our plan is definitely not to correct this entire area.
Would this be a place where fabric might be helpful, or is that just a?
Yeah, again, for the fabric to be most effective, we'd have to dig out at least a foot of material, maybe a couple of feet of material, and put the fabric lower in the cross-section, and it just wouldn't do that much at the surface.
But what we'd expect would be cracking rather than washboarding or,
Right. And we really don't know the extent of it. I mean, so our typical process is the road's reclaimed, it's then shaped and compacted, and then after it's compacted, we do a test roll on the entire road. And if the test roll passed, or in this area, if it didn't fail miserably, if it, maybe we saw some deflection, but it wasn't terrible, at that point, we'd probably make the decision to pave. If there really was some problems there, it failed the test roll miserably, we'd look at doing some more extensive repairs, but that really can't be determined until construction.
so then, from the standpoint, if we determined that something more substantial was needed there, I'm gonna speculate that one option would be for the city just to absorb that. Stick to the contracted price, but the city come up with some additional funds to determine how much correction we want before we put down the final surface.
That's
an
correct.
option.
Right.
So the contractor doesn't, it's not gonna directly affect the contractor. They know what they're getting into, saying, we're not preparing the bed, but if something needs to be done, the city would have to come up with some other funds to do that, and the residents wouldn't directly absorb that either.
That's correct.
Okay.
In regards to the typical section, we're basically proposing on replacing the existing pavement width. So for Old Viking Boulevard, that's a 22-foot pavement width. For Hallis Street, that's a 24-foot pavement width. So both Old Viking Boulevard and Hallis Street are proposed to be reclaimed and paved. On Old Viking Boulevard, there's a little bit less than 500 feet of concrete curb and gutter that's proposed just east of Jasper Street. Other than that, it's basically putting back what's there. On all of the roads, we are proposing a gravel shoulder, and that's actually one mistake that are in the plans that my staff sent to the city last week. So we had originally identified a gravel shoulder in our feasibility report. It was the intent to do a gravel shoulder, it just simply, our staff made a mistake while I was on vacation last week, so. A gravel shoulder is slightly cheaper, and it's also, better supports the edge of the bituminous.
Slightly cheaper than what?
Well, so the other option, like in Pinnaker Lake Estates, we did a topsoil shoulder, and then we seeded it afterwards,
Okay.
and,
So this is class 2 aggregate?
correct.
And on Hallis, it's topsoil?
No, so all of the feasibility reports identified a gravel shoulder in the
Okay,
typical
so the mistake
section.
was on the Hallis here, that so it shows topsoil.
Right, yeah, and all of them should be corrected to an aggregate shoulder. On Hallis Street, since we're raising the grade about 6 inches, there might be some areas where the gravel gets a little bit high and we need to do just a little bit of topsoil, basically shouldering the shoulder with topsoil just to match into the existing grade. That is one correction that will be made to these plans, but I do want to state that these plans, I mean, they largely, depict the project that the city has directed to complete. So the overlays on the Meadows of Verde Valley neighborhood, the overlay on Garnett Street, the overlay in the Rolling Oaks neighborhood, and then the reclaiming and paving of Old Viking Boulevard and Hallis Street. Really, the meat and potatoes of the project are in these plans. Any minor technical errors like the one I just pointed out will be corrected before these are sent out to contractors for bidding. So.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Bryan?
Shane, just to clarify that, so then these are, the actual bid is just a tad less than what's on here, is that what I'm understanding? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what you said with what I see on paper so that I understand it. So when you say we're gonna go with a gravel shoulder instead of having basically grass.
Right.
Right? So when I see on the bid, common topsoil and turf establishment, that's for the shoulder?
Correct.
Okay, and that's the part that would be replaced with gravel.
That is correct.
And then gravel would be a little cheaper than what's on here right now.
That is correct.
Okay, just clarify, thank you.
And so even in the, like Hallis, you know, the cul-de-sac there, and for Rolling Hills, where it says on the drawing topsoil, those are all aggregate.
That's correct. Yeah, so that's, like I said, I returned into the office yesterday, I started reviewing the plans, and identified that as an error that I just wanted to point out to the council tonight. So I will correct that, along with if there's any other items that are identified tonight that the council directs me to change, but. I also want to point out, we previously discussed some drainage concerns on Old Viking Boulevard. We've discussed also previously that the city is going to correct those drainage concerns with the city maintenance crews under separate contracts. So assuming we move this forward, we'd also want to simultaneously be working with Joe and our maintenance department to make sure that work occurs. Ideally, it would occur before this work happens. It could, if it needed, occur after this work happens. Similar with Hallis Street, if there's any culverts that need replacing there, well, that's something that we assume that city maintenance crews will do separately.
Will you be working with them to identify that?
Yeah, well, in fact, we already have on Old Viking Boulevard, we already have kind of plans to remedy the drainage problems prepared from last year when we were working on this project. So we can provide those to the city maintenance staff, and if they need any help looking at the culverts to determine if they're failing or not, we can certainly assist, but that would be, I would leave that as a judgment call by Joe.
Yeah, because I know there were a few different spots we were looking at drainage on Old Viking last year, so.
Right, I drove it tonight and there was quite a bit of water running down the shoulder of the road, so our intent would be to correct that in all locations so that no longer occurs. If it does run down the road, we prefer to have that in a concrete gutter.
All right, I just want to make sure between what we bid out here and what we can do as a city to get it corrected now, so.
Right. As far as landscaping goes, we always run into flowers or, little retaining blocks in the right of way, maybe around mailboxes or whatnot. Generally, our process for those is to send a letter out before construction indicating if you have, flowers or things that can be transplanted in the right of way or in the work area, and if you want to save them, to please remove them before a certain date. If they don't remove them, things such as retaining block and whatnot, we'll just have the contractor stack up neatly out of the work area near their property line, and we will not put those back in the right of way. We don't have any tree removal, mailbox supports. We discussed last year replacing all of the mailbox supports on Old Viking Boulevard with the swing away type. There are a handful of swing away types present, so we wouldn't replace those ones. Those ones would just simply be adjusted for height after our new road surface is met. All the other project areas we currently have in the plans for adjusting for height. So overlay doesn't change the height very much, 1.5 inches, but when we reclaim the road and repave it, that might change the elevation by 4 or 5 inches. That generally puts the mailboxes out of compliance. And so like on Hallis Street, we would just plan to adjust for height and not replace any of the mailbox supports. I mention that because sometimes that's a contentious issue with residents. When we adjust for height, sometimes expose rotted, especially on 4x4 posts, expose a rotted section of their post, and sometimes we hear about that as a city.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
I have a question on especially on Viking, because we're gonna replace them all. What do we do with, people's mailboxes are precious to them, some people's. So what are we going to do if resident John Jones has a mailbox that he made and he wants reinstalled? What is our plan there?
Something you need?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, speaking
But
as
the
the engineer.
mailboxes themselves, we're not replacing. It's the posts.
Correct.
Correct, but some people's boxes are on posts.
And
That are
on
precious.
Old Viking, they will all have to be reattached to swingaways.
All right, okay,
I mean, it's just like when the county came through and we didn't have a choice.
okay.
And the idea that it's one, safety, the other is you tend to be going a little faster there with the plows, and they do. But the primary there is when you have, until we reduce the speed limit on that road, and even after, if people are going a little faster, you want to make sure that the swing away and the breakaway, because they snap off at the base, they don't project through to the driver.
Right.
So, but yeah, if it's the mailbox themselves are part of the post, I'll have to get a new mailbox. If the mailbox will go back on the post, if they choose at that point, time to upgrade their mailbox, it's the perfect time to do it, otherwise they get back what they
Get
had.
that one. All right, thank you.
As far as restoration, we expect very little restoration on this project, but if it is required, it will call for sowing the seed in the soil and then mulching it with a hydraulic soil stabilizer. Driveways on both Old Viking Boulevard and Hallis Street will have some driveway impacts. And what we would propose is that we replace what's existing. So if we are impacting a bituminous driveway, it will be replaced with bituminous. If we're impacting a concrete driveway, it will be replaced with concrete. And if we're impacting a gravel driveway, we'll simply pave a little bump out and replace it with gravel. Signs, the traffic signs, I've noticed just in driving some of these roads that they're pretty bad. The plans do not call for replacing the traffic signs right now. That's something that the city probably wants to consider doing in the near future, particularly on Old Viking Boulevard. But it was not included in the scope of this project. As far as the engineers' estimates are concerned, they're all reasonably close to the feasibility estimates, within about 5%. So far this year, we are seeing prices a little bit higher than last year, so it's possible that the bid prices will come in slightly higher than our original feasibility estimates, but we don't expect it to be too significant. Once bids are received, we will kind of recalculate the project budgets, and we can calculate the proposed assessment amounts based on actual bid prices. Schedule, the city still use Anoka County Union as its official paper, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so their deadline for submission of ads is tomorrow at 10 a.m. If the city council approves plans and specs tonight and authorizes the advertisement for bids, we can submit that ad tomorrow morning, advertise as early as this Friday and next Friday, which would give us a bid opening date of April 16th. We have, this is the spec book. We have a completion date of August 30th. Generally, we want road projects to be completed just before school starts. And then there'd be a final completion date of September 27th, 2019. That's the final completion date allows for some time to do final punch list items, as well as get together final paperwork for final payment. We have 5 milestones proposed for this project, and basically the milestones are included in the contract just because we don't want a situation where a contractor comes in and starts a project, leaves for a few weeks, and then the city's phones start ringing off the hook and my phones start ringing off the hook. So we have milestones that once Old Viking Boulevard is started, it's completed within 28 calendar days. That's 4 weeks, which I think would be sufficient. Garnett and Hollis Street are both 21 calendar days. And the Meadows of Verde Valley and the Rolling Hill subdivision are 14 days.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
to Shane on this schedule, So from here, this Milestone one, so we're looking to start Old Viking first.
It doesn't
Not
necessarily need to be
necessarily,
started.
just once it's started,
Start, okay,
they got
But
20.
once it's
And then-
started, we expect the contractor to work diligently until it's completed, and we don't wanna see the road reclaimed and then have the contractor leave town for a month or two.
okay. With a bid opening of the 16th, what is a projected start date for the first job? And I know it's weather depending and. but-
Yeah, so that's really gonna depend on the contractor's
Okay.
schedule and other commitments.
All right,
What we like to do is bid the projects early, so this will still bid well, presumably before road restrictions even come off. And then give them the longest possible time frame, so they can basically fit these projects into their construction window, however they best work out. So we can't predict necessarily when a contractor would start. My guess is that they might start, mid-May would be the earliest, maybe 1st of June would be more realistic. But once we have a contractor, once we have the lowest responsible bidder, the council awards the contract, then we reach out to the contractor and ask them for their schedule.
a concern that I have is, on Old Viking, there's the threshing show. And that, runs Friday, Saturday, Sunday, August 16th to the 18th. However, load-in is throughout that week of the 12th, and load-out is the week of the, starting the 19th. So that we make sure that the road's not torn up during that time period. And I think it might be risky to say, do that last, after the threshing show, and then all that extra traffic isn't on that brand-new road. But if the contractor can be made aware of that event, that draws a lot of people, a lot of traffic, and I'd hate to have that impeded by the road being torn up.
Yeah, that might
Let me
even
ask
be.
a question regarding to that. Does it make a difference, the amount of traffic? And I know when 5 has been done, traffic is on it immediately, and we have a lot of heavy trucks and things. Does it matter how soon after a road is redone, how much traffic is on it?
No, as long as the base is good, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If there's, in any situation where, usually when you're building a new road, if you have moisture problems in the base and it's, the base is, or the sub base is wet or has a lot of moisture in it, then it can cause a problem, but, this is an existing road, it's been there for 50 years or whatever the time frame is. So that wouldn't be a large concern of mine. I think, that's good information, Councilmember Rainville. I think I'd like to build into our contract that the milestone is that at least the base course of bituminous is paved on Old Viking Boulevard prior to the threshing show, so prior to probably August 15th.
Like probably the 12th, because they're hauling in tractors
Yeah,
that whole week.
that whole
Okay.
week, they start on Monday, the 12th.
Yeah, if we ask the contractor to wait until after, and our completion date is August 30th, there's probably not enough time to
Right.
complete the project. And we'd also be okay with the contractor completing the project in phases. Let's say they wanted to come in and do the, everything east of Jasper or something of that manner. We'd be fine with that also. We just don't want them to come in, reclaim the entire road, like I said, and then leave for a month, so.
So along that lines, we're bidding it out as, 5 neighborhoods in one project, with the hope that the contractor sees that as a good package price. Though they may not do it all together, they may do it throughout the summer, each neighborhood separately. Do you think that affects their willingness to bid it as a package, even though they're not gonna do it all at one time? I mean, is there an economy of scale if they're not buying the bituminous all together, if they're not hauling their equipment here and then somewhere else and then back again? And the idea was,
Sure.
hopefully they've got and I don't know if anybody that may be knowledgeable in the audience wants to weigh in on that.
We do have an expert in the audience.
No, there's no problem with that. Move that in and out.
Okay.
Old Viking, I would do Old Viking first. I would take that as one project. These other ones, you can do two, you could possibly do 2 of these a day, the other smaller
Right.
ones. It'll go quick.
But there is an advantage to bidding this all out as a package.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it is. And no, I agree with what he's saying. It's, the only thing I'm just gonna interject, and I'm Shane, is if they could change that class 2 to regular class 5, it would be a big saving. I'm just throwing it out there.
Sure.
What's the difference in class 2 and class 5?
Size,
Class 2 is smaller,
3/4 inch to 1 inch.
and 5 is,
Very, almost not even noticeable. And
Right.
fines.
Yeah, class 2 is considered a surfacing aggregate. Class 5 would probably work just fine. And if there is a cost savings, we could definitely make that change.
so in the smaller neighborhoods, those are strictly residential. Old Viking obviously is a little more commercial. Well, it's residential, it's a little more passive. The other ones are cul-de-sacs. We have people that love to manicure right up to the blacktop. Is the class 5 gonna be any rougher on mowers than a class 2?
No, I would say no, all the work we do for Milton County, everything's straight class 5. It's just not.
And you roll it in?
Yep, you roll it in and sooner or later the grass will slowly come through it and it's pretty, but.
I mean, I'm on the county road and I go right out to it and
Yeah,
they shouldered the last 2 years with class 5, so.
yeah. It's just, it's a big savings, I'm just telling you, for where we gotta come and get this class 2 right now, it's huge.
All right, council have any problem with class 5 versus class 2?
If the shoulder's the same and it's cheaper than class 5 it is.
We'll just call it less expensive. It
Less expensive.
Sounds more
Less
elegant.
Okay, all right,
Or reasonable, yeah.
okay.
No, as long as it's not gonna be a significant difference to the homeowners who are trying to manicure it.
Well, you
Gravel-
are putting
gravel's
gravel-
gravel.
You are putting gravel, it's not topsoil, I mean.
No, I understandable, but not, there's obviously a difference between that and topsoil, but between a class 2 and a class 5, they're gonna see gravel.
Yeah.
And they're probably not gonna measure the size of the gravel, I'm just gonna say it's gravel, but it's gonna be compacted in so that it's basically flush with the turf and the blacktop. Do this. So,
I
yeah, go
just
ahead.
know this much, it's gonna be a lot cheaper doing that than doing topsoil throughout all these developments. That becomes very costly in itself too.
Right, and Brad Schmidbauer from North Valley did our overlay project last year, and that project, we actually had topsoil, and that went better than most projects go. I mean, we put the topsoil down, we seeded it, and I don't think we had any washouts, we didn't have to come back and touch up anything. That is very uncommon for topsoil shoulders. It was the right time, the right moisture, the rainfall happened at the right time. In most experiences where we do a topsoil shoulder, we're back there 3 or 4 or 5 times, fixing things when people drove off the edge, and made a big rut, fixing areas that didn't grow, and it really becomes to be a labor intensive as well as generates phone calls.
Well, there's a bit of a compromise, but one of the things, especially on Viking, where you're only a 22-foot wide road anyway, by putting it's a foot wide of the gravel,
Right,
it's gonna hold up a little better significantly better than topsoil if somebody were to wander off that bituminous,
agreed.
so.
Agreed, and our road standards, whenever a new road is constructed, it calls for a aggregate shoulder. And so it's what we would do in a new subdivision scenario, like we discussed, when we originally were preparing the feasibility reports, one of the things we did was meet with Brad, and he indicated that a gravel shoulder would be much more cost effective than a topsoil shoulder, and so we incorporated that into the feasibility reports. Again, we just made a error during the plan preparation.
We appreciate the input, so.
Look forward to it, thank you.
Shane, before you move on, what road was the freshman show? that you were
Old
on?
Viking.
Old Viking
That
Boulevard.
Old Viking?
And so on Old Viking Boulevard, we will incorporate a August 12th substantial completion date.
Or how about the, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember
how about
Rainville?
the Friday before that?
August 9th,
Ninth,
substantial
yeah.
completion date.
And it has a weekend to sit and,
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, people start bringing in tractors over
they
the
do,
weekend.
they do, yep.
And if, you know, if the contractor chooses to do that first, it'll be well done long before that. So.
The contract calls for, if the contractor fails to meet the substantial completion date, calls for a 600 per calendar day liquidated damages. And if they fail to meet the final completion date, it's a 300 per calendar day liquidated damages. That's in the contract. Your attorney will tell you that if it comes to enforcing liquidated damages, we'll be required to show what our damages are. I just wanted to point that out. The next item, this is a unit price contract, which means we determine the estimated quantities, we give it to the contractor, and they give us a bid for each unit of work. So the actual units of work can go slightly over or slightly under the estimated quantities. At the end of the day, it's our obligation to pay the contractor for the sum of the units multiplied by the unit price for the work.
So basically, you've estimated if they put down a little more, or a little less than that, we adjust accordingly. They put down more, we pay them for more.
Right. And where this really comes in is, let's say in the old Viking Boulevard project, we do a test roll, where those bad soils are. It passes, but there's a little bit more rutting than normal, so we ask them to, instead of putting down, 2 inches of base course, to put down an extra inch. So in that case, they are just compensated at the unit price for the extra thickness. The unit costs are already determined. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, unrelated to plans and specs, was kind of the next step after tonight. We will have to schedule the assessment hearing soon. I imagine at your regular April meeting, we'll have a resolution scheduling that assessment hearing.
When will the bids come back?
The bids will not come back until April 16th.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
to Shane and Mr. Rupi, so if our council meeting is the 8th, or the 9th, excuse me, we can still call for the assessment hearing even if we don't have the numbers? Because our bids aren't coming till the 16th?
Well, that's,
Is
Yeah,
that-
we would call it for May.
the only concern I have is part of that resolution says that you have to declare the amount to be
Yeah.
assessed. And we won't know that amount
Yeah.
because we won't have your bid back. So it almost needs to be, that's why I was asking when the bids come back. Because in order to kind of know the exact amount that we're going to assess, we have to know what your bids came back. Plus you need a couple of days to tabulate it all.
Correct.
So that's the only concern. Would that still work if even if they had to do a special meeting just to meet, approve it, and that's it, you know?
Yeah, so to approve, not necessarily to award the contract.
Not to award the contract
No,
necessarily.
but to recognize that the bids came in a reasonable number,
But
and then we would meet briefly to schedule the assessment hearing.
pass the resolution declaring the amount that we're going to assess, kind of what's the city gonna pay, what the residents going to pay, and then we would send out the notice and we would schedule, at that time with that resolution, we'd schedule the date and time. So we'd
That'd
know
work
that
well.
ahead of time.
Yep.
And it would be more a formality. I don't even know if I turned the video, you would show up, you'd make the motion, the resolution would already be in your hands with all the information, and it would be a more or less a formality. But I need that information in order to comply with the statute,
Yeah.
to give the information to the residents, and also any bonding company that if you're gonna borrow money for this project.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
so Mr. Rupi and Shane, if bids are due the 16th, you need time to put them all, to compilate them. Would the 23rd, which would be the planning and zoning, And we could, if it's just a quick hearing, we could do it the 23rd before planning and zoning, and planning
Sure, we
and
could
zoning
meet at,
could
we
start.
could meet at 6 PM.
Six.
Yeah.
Or 6:30, I mean, I don't know how long we think it would take, and maybe
I'm gonna do
telling us
6
that
and be out of the way. And
other, okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
I'm missing something.
So,
If I may,
yeah,
we have to schedule a hearing. Oh, how much time would we need if we're saying early May? How do you define early May? Before the 15th? Like hypothetically, if everything went as scheduled, what timeframe would you be looking at in May?
So the bids remain subject to acceptance for 60 days. So if we open bids on April 16th, that puts us, roughly at June 16th, so we have to award prior to that. But ideally, we would consider the bids prior to that, so we can get on the contractor's schedule and get work done, completed as early as possible. The other thing is, once we call for the assessment hearing, there are notice requirements. I think it's advertised in the paper once.
Couple of weeks.
Send out a mail notice, and yeah, it's 2 weeks before the assessment hearing.
Right, okay.
So if we had April 23rd, if we had the notices all ready to go to send out the next day,
And we can do that.
we could meet 2 weeks after that newspaper advertisement.
So then, what I'm trying to understand here is it statutory that says as soon as that special meeting is called, you gotta get everything ready and send it out?
No.
No.
This is it's more what the city engineer is talking about. It's more of a best practice to try and get us in the best possible shape for people to be working to get the job done. So the only thing it does is it gives the contractor, who's ever the lowest responsible bidder, more time to get organized, and then give us preferential treatment in getting out there to do the work.
Okay, so if we're saying we're gonna schedule a special meeting on the 23rd for 2 weeks later, we kinda know that we're gonna be looking at May 7th or so
Yeah,
for
I
that
mean,
special meeting, will that be yeah. Anyway, why can't we call for the special meeting on the 9th when we're here anyway, and if something happens, can't it always be canceled?
The only other part of that resolution is you guys declaring the cost to be assessed. I'd have to think about and look at that statute, if there's, and I can do that between now and your, what you're saying is, if there was a way for us to go ahead and tentatively set the date, that meeting, and adopt the resolution contingent on maybe the attorney and the engineer filling in the amount based on the bid, maybe we could do it that way.
Yeah, the only, I think, Mr. Mayor, I think the only way that would work is if we could, in the resolution, state that is the city's intent, or the city declares that they will pay half the project cost, or
Something like that,
percentage,
yeah.
a percentage.
Whatever the lowest responsible,
Right. And with that information, we could,
I think we could, with the regard to yes, I think if we were going to, I'm trying to think of the exact wording of it, I believe that would work. If we knew a specific figure, like percentage that you were going to pay, then I think I could make that resolution, and then you could adopt it. And we just need the date, and then everything works back from that public hearing date.
Right, yeah, because if we scheduled, I'm just saying, if we scheduled it on the 9th, we wouldn't stuff wouldn't be sent out till the 23rd or whatever.
I don't remember on
Okay.
this, no, I just don't remember, Dan, what was the percentage that the city was paying?
50.
50? I think I could make that work.
I'm just trying to.
But once I say that, you can't
Well,
change it,
Let me ask this, so theoretically, we would have, all the bids in by the 16th, and we have that, rest of that week for the engineering company to do their work, get the numbers. If we were to meet on the 23rd, before the planning and zoning, for a short meeting to schedule the hearing, would May 7th be enough time? So you could publish the 24th, or you could submit by 24th, publish on the 26th and the 3rd, there's your 2 weeks in the newspaper. And then the assessment hearing on the 7th. That way, we know the numbers when we schedule the hearing. It gives us just enough time to have the hearing, gives us, we can have the letters ready to go out, we can have the notice for the paper ready to go out, plug in the numbers and on the Tuesday meet, and do that.
Mr. Mayor,
What date are you talking about now?
if we advertised on the 26th, we have to wait at least 2 weeks before holding the assessment hearing. So 2 weeks would be May 10th, so we would not be able to have that meeting until the week of the 13th.
Okay,
So
so
we could-
from the original date that it goes out, you have to wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, I believe it's 2 weeks
I have to
in
look
the,
at
in the average, I actually
Oh, you
looked
have
at
it
it today, I looked at it today just in preparation. So it's, advertisement in the local paper and send out mail notice at least 2 weeks in advance of the hearing date.
So
So
this-
we're having a discussion. I think I can make I'm the one who raised the issue. I think I can make this work for the 9th by just saying you're gonna pay 50% of the project cost. That you're declaring the city will pay 50% of the project cost for each of the respective projects. That's the part the only part I don't have. I can put the date, if you guys wanna select a date, for the improvement hearing, that would work with the engineer's timeline for the project and your own schedules, then my office can, I don't remember if we sent out the notices before, but if we did, we could do that again. We have that all set up. We do that for people a lot.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think there's, with the option that Attorney Rupi just explained, the only downside to that is the council doesn't get to see the bid numbers and the resulting assessment amounts before they're sent out to the residents. Under the other option where you would have a second special meeting, that gives you an opportunity to review the bids. Maybe if you feel any adjustments are necessary to make those before it's sent out in the assessment notices. So it's really,
I personally would like to see the bids before they go out. I mean, this is only our second shot at this, and to blindly send them out, I wouldn't be comfortable.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
do we think it would be feasible to have the hearing the same day as our council meeting, which is the 14th, and just say that our May council agenda is limited to only things that are truly pressing, and focus on this hearing?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. The concern there I would have is that, one, certain things just have to come up at council. We haven't had a really short one yet.
Yeah.
And two, with 5 neighborhoods and this type of assessment, I'm guessing that assessment hearing is not gonna be a short meeting. Trying to do both on the same night would be longer than our last council meeting. And I know how Linda felt at that one.
All right, so Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
is there a possibility then of changing our council meeting to the 7th? And then having the public hearing for the assessments on the 14th?
Challenge with the 7th is I'm not sure we'd have all of our billings and things in yet, so early in the month.
Right, that's always been the issue. in the past.
Anytime we're on the 8th or 9th, we don't have our
Well,
the bills in.
Is it something though that,
Or the 14th, not the 21st.
Council meeting?
Council meeting could be the 21st.
or we would do it have the council meeting the 7th, and we may have to call a couple vendors and say, I mean, it's up to the vendors to get their bills in. If they don't get them in, well,
It's true.
yeah,
That's a true statement.
that's
That's a true statement.
And it's a kind of a once, maybe twice a year kind of a thing. I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, it would be perfectly acceptable too, to have the assessment hearing, say, the week of the 21st. There's, I think my main goal will be to have it relatively quickly after the bids are open, as quickly as possible. So But a 1 week delay isn't gonna make or break this project.
That's my question, is it going to interfere with the schedule? We can we can move meetings around if we need to, but I just don't wanna slow things down than we already did because of the weather.
So why can't we have the council meeting on the 21st and have that
That's one of the
assessment
things
meeting on
Mary
the
said.
14th?
My preference would be to have it on the 7th.
Well, that's fine.
And then the assessment hearing on the 14th, because there may not be anything for P and Z that night. I don't know if there's anything on the agenda for P and Z for May.
Well, that'd be the 28th, P and Z.
Oh, correct, the 21st would be Road and Bridge, yes. I don't know, if Shane feels that a week difference between the 14th and the 21st, I guess I would let Shane decide which he wants.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask a question of the attorney? If the council elects to have just a separate night for the assessment hearing, could the council also consider the bids following the closing of that assessment hearing?
Yes. All I'd have to do is just make sure that the notice of special meeting, which is what you're having tonight, says that we're going to be dealing with something as generic as the 2019 road projects. And then anything dealing with the 2019 road projects, assessment hearing, adopting motions, resolutions, whatever needs to be done to move the project along would be legal under the open meeting law. So we would just make that notice of special meeting as broad as possible to allow for the city council to do anything it needed to do with regard to the road project.
And on which day would this be?
We haven't decided on a day, we're just like a special, meeting night, that was the question. Can
14th.
you do more than one thing?
Yeah, as long as we identify,
As long as we identify what the topic is so that anybody in the public who would like to attend can attend, that's what we need.
so Shane, let me ask this. What's the magic of the April 16th? Can that be any earlier?
I can move it up 1 day. We have to wait 3 weeks after the first advertisement for bids. And if I call the ad in tomorrow before 10 a.m., it'll advertise this Friday. So 3 weeks from that is the Friday before the April 16th date.
So if we did it on the 15th, we did the bid opening on the 15th, is it possible to do the notice in the paper on the 19th? Does that leave you enough time to do what you need to do?
And that's gonna be very short to do any bid tabulations and.
If we open bids on the 15th, I could, if we opened them, yeah, I could have them tabulated and provide a recommendation to the council within a day if there's no major errors. If there's, occasionally there's things that we have to look into. It would be kind of quick.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
I'd rather give Shane the time needed to make sure that the bids are
Can I interject
correct.
anything?
Oh, sure.
Okay. This has been going on for like a year and a half. Let's give Shane enough time to go over everything, and you folks to go over everything. And if Shane says a week isn't gonna hurt us, make sure we get all our ducks in a row. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan?
I was just trying to, obviously, my effort to speed things along is actually hindering more than it's helping, so I'm okay with if we need to meet prior to our 7 o'clock P and Z meeting on the 23rd, even if it is to review the bids and call the special meeting, and that's all we're doing, knowing that that time frame we're looking at for the, let's just say, that May time period to do the assessment hearings, then that gives Shane plenty of time to do what he does. We're not messing with things legally and, that's fine.
Well, my recommendation would be, we give Shane time to do that, you get the information out to the council. We have our brief meeting on the 23rd to approve. Shane gets it noticed on the 26th. I would recommend that we probably move our council meeting to the 7th and have the assessment hearing on the 14th. The concern I have with going out as far as the 21st, then you're coming right up on Memorial Day, and I just don't want to lose momentum there. So if we can do the assessment hearing on May 14th, this means we have to be flexible and notice our city council meeting on the 7th. And yes, it may need be that we have to get creative on some of our bill paying. But if it was the 8th, you know, that would be the second Tuesday. And so it's one day off from that. So I think the office can pull together that. That would give Shane plenty of time to get his work done, gets the information out to us. We can make a reasonable decision on the night of the 23rd and still get the notice in by the 26th, and the 14th and is within that.
Half hour.
It's not rushed.
Hour.
So we can, so I think the consensus is we can plan, that we can make, the council can make having the assessment hearing on the 14th or work at the, like the earliest. That,
That would work well.
okay, perfect. And we can decide if, and if we need to move, make our meeting the 7th or the 21st, we can work around it. Our regular monthly council meeting, yeah.
So, the way I understand it.
Yeah, really, please.
Yeah, Linda and I are arguing this. All these numbers are flying back, and I'm throwing the sheets out
same
over here. The way I understand it now
Yeah.
is, for this project, let's make sure the project is, you're looking at a special city council meeting for April 23rd at what time?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
6
Okay.
o'clock. 6 o'clock PM to review the bids and to adopt a resolution declaring the amount to be assessed and calling for the assessment hearing, which I understand you are looking to do the night of May 14th. And then there's 5 different projects on this, so Shane and I will work, figure out how much time we need based on our past experience for each one. And then we'll schedule them out accordingly that night. It'll be a long night, but we will stay on track. And then the date of yours, are you moving your city council meeting?
Yes.
To May
Yes.
7th.
At this point, we're suggesting May 7th.
Canceling parking lot, yes.
Well, Park and Rec isn't scheduled until we give them something to work
Yeah,
on, so.
so, yeah. Does that make sense, Bob?
Yep.
All right.
All right, so, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Greenberg.
May 7th, council meeting, 7 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are we sticking with the 14th as the assessment meeting then as well?
Yes.
Correct.
May 14th?
Is that 7 o'clock too?
That may, I'll have to work, because we have so
may
many to
need- We may
do.
need to start
We
early.
might need start a little earlier to make it all work, because we have 5 to go through that night. And we're 5 separate ones, so we're gonna, just like the improvement hearings, we're gonna do one after the other. And so some of the stuff that you will hear in terms of introduction, descriptions, information for the residents will be complete, but will kind of be repetitive to you, but it's stuff that residents really do need to hear. The only unknown is how many people show up and what comment, how long time do they have comments.
Should we start the assessment meeting at 6 instead?
Yes.
Probably earlier the better on this one, given the amount of number of people.
So you're saying 6?
Do we need to go 5?
On the 14th.
I have no problem with it
The
myself, but.
the
but then
concern
that-
is you don't want the
people-
residents that
right.
aren't there, able to get there at 5.
14th is to be determined still. So you're working out a schedule to figure out what's gonna
Yes,
be
and
best.
my understanding is that the city council right now on the 14th is flexible to accommodate whatever schedule that the engineer and I come up with for the assessment hearings,
Anytime after 5.
anytime after 5 PM.
All right, so one more question. The 23rd of April, what was that date?
The 23rd of April.
That was the
So
date,
Tuesday.
That's a special,
To review the.
that should be
review
a
the
very
work.
short city council meeting, special
Yes.
meeting, just to review the bid tabulations that the engineer has got, and it'll just be basically showing you who bid on this project, how much they bid, and who the engineer believes is the lowest responsible bidder.
Okay.
The other document that you will have that will, and that doesn't require any action. The next thing is a motion to approve a resolution that is gonna have in there declaring the amount to be assessed for each of these projects and calling for the assessment hearing, and there'll be 5 separate resolutions, but they're all gonna be basically the same, and you guys would adopt each of those resolutions, so it could be a 10-minute meeting.
So 7 o'clock for that as well, you think?
6 PM is what I would.
6, because then at 7 is planning and zoning, right?
Right.
Okay.
So Shane, the bid openings, are you doing those? Do we,
So I will generally come to the city offices, and we would open them here at the city offices. It's usually myself and one other staff member from the city or elected official.
if you would let me know, I'd like to
Okay.
swing up for that. Typically do that in the day,
Excuse me?
sometime during the day. you
Yes,
do?
yeah. Probably 3 PM.
Okay. Yeah, let me know what you schedule and I'll swing up. All right, Bob, you want to give it to us one more time?
Yep. Here's the schedule, people.
Love
Okay.
it.
So right now, the first date is April 23rd at 6 PM.
Well, to start with the 16th, because we'll open the bids on the 16th.
16?
Do we come in on the 16th too?
No,
No. You can, it's public, but you're not obligated to do so, and there's no action item. It's just receiving it, opening it up, and basically, if somebody comes in that's after that time, then you receive their information, you'll get their packet, but you won't open it, and you'll just put it aside, because it's not responsive, it's not within the time frame. So, at the end of the 16th, Shane will open them all up, you'll have a
what
list
is,
of
what is the deadline to get the bids?
It'll be April 16th at 3 PM.
Okay,
so
so
they can drop it off.
prior to 3, if they show up at 3, they're in, if they show up at 4, they're out.
Correct.
So basically, you're opening them at 3 o'clock.
Correct. And we generally receive a few mail bids. A lot of contractors will hand deliver their bids, arrive 5 to 10 minutes early, and actually wait and witness a bid opening.
Yeah.
So if you want to know ahead of time, you can come on the 16th, otherwise you'll find out on the 23rd.
That's correct.
So,
Or when you submit, will you submit information to us or not until the 23rd?
I will provide information for a packet later on the week of the 16th.
So we will have a packet with that information prior to 23rd, so we can come prepared on the 23rd to make a decision.
So on the 16th, everybody will hand in their stuff. It'll be open, officially received. Then Shane will go back to his office, review everything, make sure it's all complete, has all the required information. If they do, he will then make sure, it's apples to apples, oranges to oranges, do his bid tabulation. That information will be provided to you in your packet. I'll also have all the resolutions that you need, so you can review them ahead of time, but they're gonna be basically standardized sort of forms. And on the 23rd at 6 PM in this location, you will all meet for probably 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on what discussion you want to have. And you will not do any action with regard to the review of the bids. That's just for your own information. That's just FYI. But with regard to the resolutions declaring the date for the assessment hearing and stuff, that you'll have 5 different resolutions to adopt. Just like we did that one night with to adopt all the improvement hearings. The next thing that will happen is that the assessment hearings will take place on May 14th, 2019, and it'll be sometime after 5 PM. And those dates, on that date, the times will be figured out by Shane, Nelson, and I. And my office will work with the city staff to send out all the required notices. We will work with them. If Ellen needs us to do it, we're set up for it. We do that for a lot of communities. Then the next thing would be on, that we have discussed tonight, is on May 7th is your changed May City Council meeting date. And it's still at 7 PM here. And that is a special meeting, so we do need to post for that. So we'll just post that your regular meeting on whatever date that normally would be is
14th.
is changed, and now changed over to here to tell everybody. So anything you would normally do on the 14th, you'll now be doing on the 7th.
And Mr.
Councilmember
Mayor,
Ringo?
to Mr. Rupi, the 16th, it's not a meeting per se, but when the bids are opened, if there was a possibility of more than 2 council members being there, shall we not post to
Yes.
say that?
If,
Just to be
typically,
sure?
people do not come to those things,
Yeah.
but if you're interested, and you thought more than 2, because the mayor's already indicated his desire to be there, if you thought more than 2 of you would be there, then I would go ahead and post that a quorum of the council may attend the bid opening on April 16th at 3 PM, and that would be sufficient.
And I would prefer that, I'm
Then I
not
will
on
put
my
a,
calendar, but
then I will
just to
put
be
a,
sure.
then I will send to Ellen tomorrow a notice to
Okay.
post so that you're covered. So anybody that would like to attend on the 16th, I'll also send Ellen a notice tomorrow of the special meeting for the April 23rd. So she's got that to post as well. And I'll also send her a special meeting for the May 7th, because we also know that one already.
Okay.
So the one on the 23rd, though, we're gonna go over all the bids, right?
Yeah.
That's what that's about.
That's just to get information. You're not gonna review the bids themselves. You're just gonna get a spreadsheet or a thing that says 5 people submitted bids.
You're gonna have 5 resolutions, right?
That,
Not
that's,
that meeting?
that's something, no, that's something different. That's setting the dates, and because each one of these projects is separate and has a separate time and date for this assessment hearing,
Okay,
I'll have a different resolution for each.
okay.
You can adopt them all in one motion, because that's what I'm gonna have you do tonight with all of these that I listed. I'm gonna have you adopt resolutions numbers 2019-22 through 2019-26. They're all the same, and you're gonna adopt those. All I need is you to adopt it, you know.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just address Councilmember Blake's last question. So just, the reason that we are not going to consider the bids at that meeting is just simply a matter of limiting the city's risk. So before we consider accepting those bids and awarding the contract, we like to have that assessment hearing, so we know if there are going to be any objections, and if there are going to be any objections or assessment appeals, how many. So that will
Okay.
allow us to measure our risk before we award the contract. As Bob stated before, once we award the contract, there's no getting out. At that point, we're committed to doing the project.
So that's why you're doing that on the 14th?
Correct.
Okay, I
And
get
the,
it.
and the reason why there's really no consideration by the council of the bids
Yeah,
is because, as Shane said, it's all or nothing.
okay,
Once you have the lowest, once Shane tells you who's that lowest responsible bidder, you know, here's the number, and that, whichever one's the lowest, it either goes to that person or we reject everything.
okay.
So there isn't anything to go through and say, well, you know, so-and-so
Don't have to
contractor's
discuss
got a
it.
better reputation
I
than that. There is no discussion. Under Minnesota law, they're the lowest responsible bidder. It has to go to them, or we reject it.
The only question would be is
Okay.
if they're lowest, but they're not responsible.
And I've, in 30 years of doing it, never had any, I've never had a reason to declare somebody irresponsible. You really have
At
to,
the time that Bob Bituminous bid that big project over here, they weren't very responsible. He was working out of the back of his truck.
so again, it's pretty much next to nil to be able to declare somebody irresponsible.
Right.
And
But we can't do anything on the bids until we've had the assessment hearings.
And then after, and that's why we do the assessment hearing during this window of that 60 days that Shane says it's open, so that we can then decide, if a lot of the residents say, no, we don't want this project for whatever reason, we still have the opportunity to say no, reject all the bids, and then maybe you decide you're not gonna bid it out, or you're gonna wait a year to rebid.
But it could be, I mean, they might come in, oil prices between now and then may just skyrocket, and we do like last year at Old Viking, just say, well, look at these numbers and get prepared for what we're gonna hear. But this is a chance for you to see the numbers, but we're not gonna make any decisions until after the 14th. Because we promised everybody they got one more shot at it once we actually knew what the real numbers were.
Okay,
But, and that's why the 16th doesn't matter that much. You'll get all the information on 23rd, and you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks to be prepared for what the residents might be saying. Because that'll be public information at that time, and the residents will know. Councilmember Bryan.
So now that we've put all those pieces into play, I think there's at least, maybe I'm wrong, is there one more piece of the puzzle then for after this?
Yes.
Where
Well, there's other pieces of this. This is just getting you to that stage, you know?
Right, I'm sorting my pieces into the box and trying to get all the edges together so I can deal with the whole, anyway. After we've had the last assessment hearing on the 14th, then we would need another special meeting to award the contract.
Correct. Or at the end of the night of the 14th, the assessment hearing, you guys determine, we have now held the assessment hearings, we have now listened to the residents, we feel comfortable that the residents want us to proceed, we feel comfortable with the amount of the money, and you can award the contract that night.
no, on the 14th. if
The
it
reason that
works.
we wait until after you've had that public hearing is so that you can hear from your residents, and if a majority are very upset about this, and this does happen in our world, for whatever reason, you have the ability to step back from it and either say, okay, we're gonna reject that bid now, or we'll accept it. And for most communities, after they hold that public hearing, that very night, if you feel comfortable in doing it, you can award that contract. The resolution will be ready for you if you so desire.
Councilmember Greenberg.
Do we feel at this time that all 5 communities are confident in going forward in this?
No idea till we see final numbers. The feedback I've heard is the majority of them think it's a necessary thing. They don't want to pay the assessment, but they think it's a good.
That was my feeling as well, that most communities were for it.
Yeah.
So
But-
I think
But
we could-
ultimately, the final numbers will say that if, as Shane said, the bituminous prices are up a little bit right now. If it's significant by the time the bids come back in, that may cause some consternation on residents.
I only bring it up because if there were a time to try and submit everything separately, it would be now to consider it. Otherwise, once we're moving forward with this one large bid that's for all 5 communities, there's really no turning back.
Right.
So now would be the time to just take pause and say, do you think everyone was on board? I believe most people were on board.
I don't think any neighborhood was any more or less enthusiastic. I don't think by saying, let's take this one neighborhood out, it will make a difference. So I would say that they're equally on board. And as long as we're relatively close to what we guesstimated the cost to be, I think most people will support it.
I'm confident in moving forward with the bid being all 5. And I'm confident that we can, once we see
Yeah, I'm
the
hoping
bid-
it makes a difference to the contractors to have an economy of scale there. I wasn't overly convinced tonight that it made a big difference, but if they're moving their equipment in and out, because it sounded like 3 of the projects they thought they could knock off in a couple of days, so.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think, in regards to a comment from the audience tonight, you know, they like to have these smaller projects where they can go, for a day or two. Particularly if, let's say they're working on a road, it's a new construction, they get rain. A lot of times after a rain, it takes a good week or two, before that dries out and they can pave there. So if they have an overlay that can be ready within 2 days after a rain, They prefer to have that flexibility so they can keep their guys working. In my experience, that's what will occur. Old Viking would be done right away as kind of a project that actually be put on their schedule. These other roads, we might get a lot shorter notice because they're gonna be somewhat fill-in work when it's needed.
And they get to put it on their calendar and their summer's filled up, so they know what they got.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainbow.
Two questions. One is to Mr. Rupy. So you're saying that at the assessment hearing, we can move forward with this? We can accept it? If we choose to? What, will you remind me of, what is the deadline for the residents to voice their opposition? Does it have to be by the end of the assessment
At the
hearing?
close of the assessment
Okay,
hearing,
so-
when, assuming the mayor is running that meeting, when that meeting is
Okay.
closed, that public hearing is closed, if they have not objected, formally objected by that time, the argument is they waive that right to object.
Okay.
There is some case law, maybe if somebody was in a coma and they couldn't, the court might give, I'm using an example from, but other than that, the court's laws have said, no, you are supposed to assert your objection either before that public hearing or at that public hearing, and we will tell people that several times during that public hearing.
All right, thank you. That's what I remember. I
And
thought
if
I
they were to
remembered.
object at that public hearing,
If they were to object at that public hearing, then you would know that
Right.
that's a potential court challenge to the assessment. Now, that doesn't mean that residents actually will go forward with that, but that preserves their right. And the reason we do this now is so that we know if residents are going to potentially object. Because I had, it's a same client that Shane's office works with, it was about 6 years ago. And that was the town board, and everybody was in favor, but one or two ladies said, we're gonna object. And they wrote their objections and handed it in at that assessment hearing, and the town board said, if anybody objects, we are not doing this project. And she says, no, you're not gonna do that, and I said, yeah, we are. We're not paying money to a lawyer to defend the assessment in court and spend that money, because that's not in our budget. So if you want to do that, if you want to object, we can't stop you, but we're not voting for this project. We're telling you right now, in front of all your friends and neighbors, this project is dead. And she came up and said, how do I go about withdrawing it? I said, write something saying, I hereby withdraw my objection, and sign it and date it, and I put it in the file. And we did go ahead and do that project, and that project was successful, and they were happy with the project at the end. But that is the reason why, is that you guys need to understand if anybody filed any sort of objection, then you know kind of what your risk is and the cost benefit. Then that's the analysis at the end of that assessment hearing, before you award that contract, you need to consider. Because even though, when you object at the assessment hearing, it preserves your right, you still have to go, basically hire a lawyer, file the paperwork in court, filing fees, get an appraisal and all that kind of stuff. But it also sends a signal to us that and the reason why this is important for you as a city is because that cost of my time and stuff to defend you is not covered by insurance. So that is, if we have to hire an appraiser, because that's how, experts know how this works. And plus the attorney's time, the appraisal time, Shane's time as an engineer to explain your time to testify, that's the cost benefit analysis that you have to make. Typically, we rarely ever get any objection.
Right.
And because I think we've educated people and people understand the necessity for the project. That's why we hold so many informational meetings, we give them information, I think people are educated. However, if somebody does give you a written notice that they may challenge it, then you need to know that before you decide to award the contract, because at that point in time, I can't get you out of it afterwards.
And to Mr. Rupy, and again, that objection has to be in writing.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so.
But if somebody, it's gotta be in writing. However, if somebody sent an email or something, I would count that as an objection.
To me, that's in writing. It's not just a phone call saying, okay. All right, then another question I have, to Mr. Nelson is, you had just explained that these smaller jobs, you know, it rains the week of June 3rd, and so they can't do the big one, they can. Is there, can we coordinate with that contractor to say, give us a heads up, and having the city already having an email list of those residents that we can then give them heads up? That, you know, we're saying it's gonna happen sometime between now and September. But if we know the contractor gives us 3 days' notice that we're gonna be out there, we can give the residents 3 days' notice to say, we're coming out. I just think that's
Would you even have it, I think? They might decide on the weekend, we're doing it Monday.
well, if we have some, I mean, if we have the ability to provide that information to our residents, I think that's a smart move.
Yeah, I've never been successful in compiling an email list ahead of time. As a project progresses, I've developed email list and sent out weekly email blast. Something that might work better now is having like a project website or even a project Facebook page where you can direct people. You know, as far as the overlays go, it won't have a big impact on the property owner, so if they decide to move into a neighborhood and do an overlay, they're still gonna have access in and out of their house. They're gonna see some milling and some preparatory work a couple days in advance, so it won't be a complete surprise. And we could also, in situations where we thought it had an impact to the residents, like when the concrete driveway is gonna be removed and it's gonna be replaced and it takes 7 days to cure. In those cases, we generally just, you know, if there's 15 houses, it's the most time efficient to just hand deliver 15 notices.
Well, if we can just put some thought into that if it all, we're trying to communicate in a more,
Proactive.
proactive manner, and with our residents, and if we can do that, and, I mean, I'd be willing to contact the residents and ask for emails, and if that, you know, then give them to Ellen, and Ellen can have an email group that, for Hallis Street, or,
As long
you
as
know.
it doesn't become more than that.
No, it would just be this specific for this, and then once they're done, you know, it's done.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Blake?
I feel like telling the people that there's this block of time is they're going, sometime in this block of time, they're going to have road work done, is really pretty sufficient. I mean, once, in the neighborhood where I was, and there was some road work done, nobody contacted us, and a whole street was ripped up, but it's just, you live there, so you expect you know there's gonna be something done eventually, and when it's started, you just adjust. I just don't think I don't think that's offensive to people, as long as we give them a time frame. I mean, we can't just all of a sudden, but they know that there's gonna be something done between these months, and that they're going to have some work done in their street during that time. I don't think they have to be notified 2 days before it's gonna happen. I don't think it's gonna change anything. What would it matter to me if I knew that it was gonna happen 2 days early? It's not gonna
They
change.
did my road, and I'm
Huh?
paying my assessment, you know, they did my road, and it was a day or so, you know,
Yeah.
it was nothing, it was, and I, like you had mentioned, I knew that it was a time frame of
Yes,
sometime this
sometime,
summer.
yeah.
They got there one day, I don't know if my road was one of those fill-in roads, but it worked, and literally, they were gone in like a day or
Yeah,
two.
yeah.
I mean, it was a mill, an overlay, it wasn't anything different, you know.
I admire what you're saying, don't get me wrong, Councilmember Rainville. But I think that's wonderful, and I think that'd be a really amazing, but I think it's a lot to put on anybody for something I don't think is that impactful to show that we care, or that we wanna be more communicative.
One other option might be just to put it on the city's website.
Yes,
As soon as we have knowledge, if Shane or the city has knowledge, we put that, and anybody that wants to can periodically check the website, you know.
And you could tell the people when they come here that if we plan on doing that, when they come for the hearing, that this is gonna happen, but I think too, it's pretty common for these things, road work to be done and people aren't really notified that soon before, just a couple days before it happens, and they adjust.
So if we do get objection, any significance, does that jeopardize all 5 projects?
If you decide, okay, so people on Hannah Street, enough come forward and say, we're gonna challenge this, and the city council says, we really don't wanna spend that much money on the engineer, the lawyer, and the appraiser and stuff, and the court fees and everything, then yes, because the way this is being bid, it's all or nothing. And that's what that other town board a decade ago said to the residents. We are going to not do this, because we can't afford to pay the lawyers and pay our share of what we're paying to buy down your assessment. And you are putting this whole project at risk. And that's a decision that you'll have to make.
And it won't be getting any cheaper.
No.
All right. Anything else that the professionals need to tell the council?
Mr. Mayor, in regards to financing for this project, I know we had the city's financial advisor involved earlier on, but that would likely be something that the city should consider coordinating fairly soon. If we award.
We've got some rough numbers to start the ball rolling.
Right. They will likely want to, set up a date for, assuming we accept the bids, we would want to be, ready fairly quickly after that to take action to sell the bonds. So we won't want to sell the bonds until we know we're going to accept the bids, but we want to have bond proceeds, and that would be some kind of a financial analysis. If a lot of work occurred in June, we would likely have our first pay estimate due at the July council meeting, and so we would have to either have money to cash flow that or have the bond proceeds at that time. So that's something we can discuss later on, but just to make sure with.
Who's your financial advisor?
Ehlers.
Who at Ehlers?
Bruce
Kimball.
Kimball.
That is something you guys are, and what we're going to discuss tonight is one of the necessary steps to give you the right to seek bonding on that.
All right. So is it appropriate at this time to get hold of Bruce and say, start preparing documents?
Yeah. Well, it's appropriate because we now can basically give him a timeline as, here's what we're doing. Here's when we think the bid might be awarded, because right now you're looking potentially at awarding the contract on May 14th.
As early as the 14th.
And if they want to start working, and the Old Viking, which is a major project, they do that in June, then they will be looking for money in July. So it is appropriate to give Bruce that information. We can share with him any information that Shane's got, what I have, that they might need, but that gives them the sort of the timeline information that they need to put everything together for you.
Mary, do you know when the spring tractor pull is for the threshing show?
I would have to look that up.
So, while she's looking that up, make a motion to the council to direct staff to engage Ehlers Associates to do preliminary work on bonding options.
Second.
A motion is second. Any other
Blake
discussion?
seconded, Councilmember Blake seconded it.
Councilmember Blake seconded.
Who made the motion?
I did.
What was the motion again?
To direct staff to engage Ehlers and Associates to begin the preliminary preparation for bond options.
I'll
Any
give them a
discussion?
call tomorrow.
Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryant?
one other question for Engineer Nelson. If I'm just mental picture, right now, Old Viking is not striped, is that my understanding?
It is striped.
It is striped.
It's just
okay.
really faded.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, will we have fog lines on that?
Yes, I believe so.
we're striping to do double yellow all the way up and down, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Really? No passing.
No passing.
So
That's
that's
all
the,
striped currently.
Behind the tractors.
so that's the 4-inch solid white? Is that
No.
these
So-
fog lines?
Right, that's the fog lines, and there's about twice the quantity as the 4-inch double solid
Okay.
yellow, so.
Okay, yeah, and is there passing on Old Viking now?
No, it's all striped,
It's all striped double yellow.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be, but it's, it's not legal.
Yeah, okay. I just couldn't recall. Nope.
I can say there's fog lines there right now, they're pretty worn off.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Greenberg?
in the Garnet Street, one of the residents in the meeting had actually asked the question, how do I oppose this project?
And we told them at that time.
We said give feedback during the meeting.
Well, then we also told them if they weren't officially opposed it, to put it in writing.
And that never
That has
materialized?
not happened as of yet.
All right, I was just gonna offer my services as a liaison.
As far as convincing them not to oppose it?
Just to alleviate any fears, if there were anyone in all of our discussions with any of the residents, he was the one resident that I felt may do anything like that. But if he didn't offer any writing at that time, well then, I guess we're confident we can move forward.
And when we send out the notice of the assessment hearing, that we worked so diligently to come up with a time and date for, it will tell people that information, that they have to, if they are going to object, they have to object prior to in writing. And so.
So there will be opportunity.
Well, there will be, that'll be in the notice. It's a very, I have to tell you, it's a very stilted notice because it's statutory. This basically says, this is the kind of the statute, the notice we use because the courts have said, this is what you gotta use, you know? And then when people are here, at least a couple of times, we tell them, if you're gonna object, you have to object in writing. And submit it before. It just means go get a sheet of paper. I usually have a sheet of paper. I've handed it to people before. I object. They sign their name and that's their objection. I usually ask the clerk in the meeting, have you received anything by email or, objecting to this prior to this? No. And then, once you know at the end of that public hearings who's objected, then you guys have to make the call. Do we go forward or not? And just because somebody submits a written objection, doesn't mean they're actually going to go through with it. It just preserves their right. But then they have so many days, once we do this, we make the decision to go forward with that assessment, they have to then perfect their rights and give us notice and file in district court and pay the filing fees, get their attorney, get their appraiser, engineer and all that. And so you gotta be really committed because it's expensive.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Raymond?
the question on the spring tractor pull, it is June 15th. They are also hosting an event June 14th and 15th, which is the Guild of Metalsmiths. I don't know what participation level that is or anything, but that is what's currently on their calendar.
So that could be a heavy traffic time in there too, so not as heavy obviously, as the Russian show.
Yeah, it's just one piece,
But
it's
with
in
the
their metal.
tractors coming in and out, and I don't know what what kind of trucks are coming to the Metal Guild, but
I'll make a note about the contractor accommodating traffic for an event, on the plan, just to make them aware of it.
Councilmember Bryant? Councilmember Greenberg? Councilmember Blake?
Got a problem.
Anybody else?
No, I think we're,
All right,
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville,
I would move that the council adopts.
hang on, so before you do
Oh,
that,
okay.
is there anything else you need to tell us, Bob? You were starting to say something about you were going to inform us of tonight.
I think we've covered everything, and
so what is it about the motion and for the regulations for bonding?
Yeah,
that, we're gonna talk about that in a second here. I'll explain these resolutions. You have two basically different resolutions that we get to.
okay, so you were gonna move the resolutions?
I was
So
going
I'd
to-
like to hear the resolutions before we move them.
Well, I'll explain the first resolution, approving plans and specification and order advertising for bids. There is just one resolution for that because it pertains to all of the various projects. And it's drafted so that it applies to all of the 5 projects. And basically, that, in a nutshell, that resolution says that such plans and specs which are on file with the city engineer are hereby accepted and approved, and that the city clerk and the city engineer are hereby directed to advertise for bids for the project, I'm summarizing, under applicable laws, and no bids will be considered unless sealed and filed with the city clerk and accompanied by a cash deposit, cashier's check, or bid bond, or certified check payable to the city for 5% of the amount of such bid. That's to guarantee that they're not gonna back out once we receive their bid. And that is the first resolution, resolution number 2019-22, and it applies to all 5 projects: Old Viking Boulevard, Palace Street, Meadows of Verde Valley, Rolling Oaks, and Garnett Street.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryant?
just a question for Attorney Rupi. When, this is just just an observation, does the resolution have to say payable to the clerk or payable to the city, or doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville?
a question to Mr. Rupi. On number 2, we've got the city clerk, written to, specified twice. We don't currently have a city clerk, should we put deputy clerk?
I can make that change.
Okay.
So may clerk or deputy clerk,
I'll go deputy
we'll
clerk.
have a clerk by that time.
Okay.
I guess right now it's deputy clerk.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember
I'd
Bryant?
like to make a motion to approve resolution.
So,
Okay.
so let me, before we do that again, so then 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, those are just saying intent of the city to reimburse certain expenditures.
Right, that we'll cover after this one's done.
Okay,
I'll
so
explain
we'll do
that resolution to you, and they're all the same, so
All right, so Councilmember Bryant?
Mr. Mayor, motion to approve resolution 2019-22, approving plans and specifications and ordering advertisements for bids as amended.
I second it.
Motion and second, any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
all right, and then the second grouping of resolutions is a resolution declaring your official intent to reimburse yourselves. In other words, it's saying that you guys might seek, in a nutshell, it's for the IRS and the bonding company. And it's basically telling people that you may seek to reimburse yourselves for the cost you spent to date by borrowing money and for each of these projects. And the reason I separated each of these out into each individual project is because this is a document that the bonding company, the Ellers and stuff, is gonna need. And so, while this other one could be generic, the first one you just did, awarding plan specs, this, because this goes straight to financial stuff, I separated them out for each one. For purposes of a resolution tonight, although they have different names of each of the projects in here and the different amounts of what the engineer's construction estimate is for each of these projects, they could all be adopted as a grouping. And if that was the desire of the city council, it would be resolution number 2019-23 through resolution number 2019-27.
Mr. Mayor,
All right,
I move the council adopt resolution 2019-23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, declaring the official intent of the city of now then to reimburse certain expenditures from the proceeds of improvement bonds to be issued by the city.
Second.
motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, if there's no additional.
Bob was gonna talk to us
Oh,
about
that's right, I'm sorry.
finance of the bonding.
I'm sorry?
You're gonna talk about the bonding then?
Oh, the bonding will be, I will call on your behalf, you said staff, I give Bruce Kimmel a call tomorrow, tell him where we're at on this project, and make sure he understands that Shane's also involved in this, to answer any questions that he might have. And then I'm gonna have him get in touch with the mayor to discuss where he feels they need to go. If he needs any additional information, he'll get that from myself or from Shane, and we will work with him as necessary, but typically, they gotta do their own thing. And, but I'll just give him a heads up, and here's the timeline that the city council is talking about for this, and so that he's aware, and that he'll make his own decision as to kind of when he needs to be involved, and he needs to get things before you, for you to adopt. Typically, a lot of those things, he'll email me for me to review, but it's the same stuff that typically you do, he does each time. And typically, I don't need to be present when you guys adopt those things. A lot of times also, and I don't know if he will do it in this situation, but sometimes Bruce will come out and explain it to you. Go through it and kind of the interest rates, what he found, payback options, things like that, to make sure you're comfortable. Typically, this stuff is usually done in a 10-year window, but that doesn't necessarily make it so. I have one client that was looking at maybe doing it in 15 years, just because they needed a little bit more of a flow for cash. And the only reason why 10 years is historically done is because it's hard to go back to residence if the road starts to, the road has a lifespan,
Yeah.
as the engineer will say, and it's hard to go back when you need to do some maintenance work on it and you need to assess again. When somebody just finished their assessment, they want a good window between assessments. And so generally, that's why most of the time you'll see this stuff as usually a 10-year window. But Bruce can hear what you guys have to say. He can make adjustments accordingly and give you advice professionally about what's your best financial option. And I will give him a call tomorrow and touch base with him and make sure he understands where we're at on this. And so I think you guys have done a great job.
Well, we appreciate your professional help, both of you.
And be kind to me when you see these minutes. And if I screw it up, feel free to make changes,
All we can say, Bob, is we hate typos.
Yeah. Well,
All we
it
can
just,
say really is thank you.
Thank you.
it could be like, my office was in trial one time. It was a 6-week trial. Major case. This was when I was a brand new lawyer, and I'm there in a support role. And it turns out that we won, but the other side was going to appeal. And, when the court reporter is there taking every single thing down in a 6-week trial. Evidently, this court reporter had mental problems.
Uh-oh.
And all they did with the machine was, and it was a dot. There was no transcript.
Oh.
And nobody knew what to do. because nobody, I never experienced that, and nobody, even at the senior partners, didn't know what to do. And ultimately, the judge said that he had taken notes, and that his notes would be the transcript. And I'm like, well, we didn't particularly like that, but once the judge says it, you can't really argue with it. But that was one of them. They just went down like that, and then actually, I guess they went and sought mental health after that.
Yes.
And they got
I bet.
Well, I want you to know, not only is it impressive that he did it for us, he did it all left-handed.
Whoa. Because he is left-handed.
I can even do this. But I appreciate your patience with me here. And I will get this over to Ellen probably sometime tomorrow while I still remember my checks. Well, but this way, if I do it tomorrow, I'll still have it in my mind as my notes. And again, if I got anything wrong, please feel free to make any changes you feel are necessary. Also, I saw a note from Ellen that you guys have a special city council workshop on Tuesday of next week on the comp plan. That, I have a conflict with that, so I don't usually attend those anyway. I just wanted to make sure people understood that.
Yeah, this is the community perspectives, land use plan, so I don't think it's critical that you're there, we're just an update. We've been trying to get this discussion in, so.
Okay.
It's really, the community perspectives is going to be fairly consistent with our 2030 plan. The land use plan, we haven't addressed the zoning yet, but we just have to finalize that.
Well, that's,
The
this
question-
comp plan, the comp plan and the zoning are two different things.
Yeah, the question that came up,
Mr. Mayor,
and it will be,
I'm just questioning, is that appropriate that meeting was
Yeah,
called for
you
the,
can't- We can't go into the comp plan stuff, because this
No.
is a special meeting
But-
only for the roads.
okay, so if there's no additional input on the topic of the road plans, I move to adjourn this meeting.
I second.
and the meeting is adjourned.
Right below the red one?